Hey guys, it's Jay. Welcome back to my channel, where we discuss the popular culture of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Well, I'm back, and I want to get into talking about J.R.R. Tolkien again. I think most of you remember the reviews I did for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. These two stories were instrumental in shaping my childhood, as, number one, they were a fantasy dream, and of course, represented everything that fantasy had to do with at the time. Having seen them on big screen was huge for me, as the books themselves were difficult to read sometimes, and I really enjoyed the kind of visual aspect that these two films brought to television and to movies at the time. It's funny, coming from a television adaptation with The Hobbit, and the kind of stylization that brought to the screen, and then seeing Ralph Bakshi's version of The Lord of the Rings, which was more rotoscoped and a little bit more realistic. You really had clashing and conflicting types of animation, but the stories remained true, and I was really hoping to see The Return of the King after The Lord of the Rings. Unfortunately, Ralph Bakshi couldn't produce The Return of the King, as the studio, Warner Brothers, I believe, didn't feel that it was a success, so they wouldn't produce the second version of the film. Now, in most cases, this would pretty much be the end of this story. But, in a surprise move to everybody, in 1979, Rankin and Bass came back and actually ended up producing their own version of The Lord of the Rings. Let's have a look. The 1979 version of The Lord of the Rings, which was adapted from the third book, The Return of the King, was brought to television by Rankin and Bass. And as a surprise move, it literally picks up directly after the events of the Lord of the Rings movie, which was released the year previous in 1978 by Ralph Bakshi. This was usually a surprise to everybody. I mean, why would you produce something which is from a rival studio, number one? Number two, is a direct competition to your studio. It really was one of those complexing little things back in the 80s. I mean, the rights from one film to television, it's really, really confusing. And I'm not really going to get into that, because that's a whole different ball of wax entirely. But suffice it to say, somehow, Rankin and Bass was able to acquire the rights for the Return of the King. There are many differences from the movie adaptation to the television adaptation, for obvious reasons. Ralph Bakshi tended to favor rotoscoping over traditional animation. It's something which you'll notice in a lot of his films is done quite liberally. He does it in Cool World, he did it in The Lord of the Rings, and in some cases it has a lot of mixed results. Especially with The Lord of the Rings, as we've seen in my previous review, many of the rotoscope scenes weren't even rotoscoped. They were actually just filmed actors with the action darkened, some of the characters super highlighted in different shades to give that illusion of animation. But in reality, it was just people on film. Not too sure if that's disingenuous or not, but it did make for a very interesting film at the time. Rankin and Bass, on the other hand, they were pure animation. Obviously coming from a more puppeteering background in terms of their holiday classics, this time they relied heavily on the Japanese studios to do justice to the fantasy setting of The Lord of the Rings. And I think it worked out really, really well. Our story opens up with a monologue by Gandalf the Grey. He speaks of a terrible evil which has come to infest the land, like a terrible malignancy.
Hear you now, a story of good against evil, an epic that has its beginning and an ending, and ends at a beginning. Listen as we speak of the fall of a Lord of Darkness and the return of a King of Light. Concern yourselves with armies and wizards, phantoms and emperors, cloud-capped towers and bloodied fields of horrendous carnage. Consider no less than the cataclysmic transformation of that ancient world of wonder and magic to the world we know now, of man. And
in a surprise move, instead of continuing with the actual story, we end up going all the way into the future for Bilbo's birthday. Here, he's surrounded by family and friends. Gandalf, Elrond, Samwise, Frodo, even Merry and Pippin. And there, he begins to nod off and fall asleep as he's so tired from apparent old age.
Blast! What a time to fall asleep. Who's asleep? Just resting my eyes.
As Bilbo continues to drift in and out of sleep, Sam and Frodo decide that they should have a smoke while waiting for him to cut the cake. And to Bilbo's shock, he sees that Frodo is missing a finger. It is then that Bilbo decides he must know what has happened to his nephew. In a wonderful fashion, Gandalf asks the minstrel of Gondor to regale the tale to everyone present. And he begins singing the ballad of Frodo of the Nine Fingers.
Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom. It has its beginnings 2 ages past, when Bilbo set forth to reclaim the dwarves' gold from the dragon Smaug.
What a wonderful way to open up a tale. First, obviously, we don't have any reference, especially if you hadn't seen the Lord of the Rings movie. It was, I think, rated PG-13 or PG-17? I can't exactly remember. But I suppose younger children would not have been able to watch this film. So instead, Rankin and Bass opted to do a recap. And then, a really surprise move and going all the way back into the future, just to tell us that Bilbo is actually 131 years old and now needs to learn about the tale, putting us, the audience, in Bilbo's shoes. Really quite clever. The ballad starts off with Frodo's capture. He and Sam had had many great adventures, but finally, while climbing the tower, were captured by the orcs. Frodo has been thrown into the tower, has gone through many tortures, and Sam has vowed to climb the tower and to rescue his friend. One of the great things about the Return of the King is this particular version by Rankin and Bass explores a few more of the wonderful scenes which were not able to make it into the Peter Jackson version. One of the main obstacles which Sam faces is his own struggle with his version of what to do with the One Ring. In this scene, Sam is actually tempted by the ring itself, as he finds it lying on the ground, where the orcs had apparently dropped it. Because he has the ring and Sting, he decides to carry the burden from Frodo himself. But this would mean abandoning Frodo. And as he continues to walk further and further away from the tower, he decides that perhaps the ring would be better in his hands rather than Frodo's. This particular scene is one of temptation, and we can see that Sam is furiously trying to resist the temptations of the ring. Although at one point, he starts seeing himself as this grand leader, this hero among all hobbits. And he himself is able to capture the power of the ring and turn this world of decay and suffering into a world of his delight. Finally, Sam decides to claim the ring. But before he can, he holds back and realizes that this is not a life for him. He's just a simple hobbit, and because of that, a simple garden and a wonderful family is all that he needs. As Samwise continues to search for Frodo, we go instead to see Minas Tirith, which is under a siege by the dark forces. Gandalf oversees the fields of Pelennor to see if there's any sign of a rescue from friendly forces. Unfortunately, everything seems bleak. And to make matters worse, Pippin brings news of Denethor, who has commanded his own execution.
You cannot do this.
Nay, nay, soon all shall be burned. The West has failed. It shall go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended. Ash, ash and smoke blown away on the wind.
All shall not be ended. Theoden's forces are on their way.
This scene is played out very differently from the Peter Jackson version, as we are able to find Denethor in a state of madness. We don't find out about Faramir or any losses that he's incurred, but all we do discover is that Denethor has fallen into despair. He also talks about specifically looking into his Palantir. Gandalf explains that a Palantir is the stuff of wizards that can see the future. This is the first time we are made aware that Denethor has any sort of insight into the activities of Sauron and the forces of evil. One of the great things about the Rankin and Bass version is these wonderful little scenes which were definitely cut out of the Peter Jackson version. One of the main focuses on Samwise's journey is the two Watchers. Although these gates are massive in size, they're pretty much just gates. They have two very distinctive golem statues, which appear to be watching you as you walk. This obviously creeps out Sam, but he decides to ignore them and try to continue on. He tries to move past the gates, but encounters something of a physical barrier, even though there's nothing there.
Like some invisible gate. Oh, that's how the Watchers keep guard, eh? Blast! How do I get through or climb over or under something I can't see? How?
In this particular case, inside of Frodo's cloak is the vial of Galadriel. This, of course, is a secret, but Sam is able to use this to get past the Watchers. Although Sam has defeated the Watchers in this regard, they have one more trick up their sleeves, and they call out and cry in fury, thus revealing their whereabouts of Sam to the forces of City Thongol.
An alarm! Oh, that's done it!
Sam braces himself, but to his surprise, no one comes. He finds that they're all dead, so he starts to climb the tower. He's finally encountered by a single orc who tells him of the fate of Frodo.
The Hobbit, Frodo, is he still alive?
If anything still lives here, he does.
Finding Frodo at last, Sam succeeds in rescuing him from his tormentors, only to find that Frodo is not that much worse for wear. As a matter of fact, Frodo scolds Sam and demands that he gives him the Ring of Power.
I'll keep it round my neck, for it's too heavy for you to bear in your condition. Give it to me! Give it to me at once, you can't have it. All right, Mr. Frodo. Here it is.
This brings Sam to his knees, and after a moment, Frodo regains himself and realizes that the ring's malignancy is what actually drove him to say those things. Having reunited, the two leave this tower and go on to face the Vale of Gorogoroth. It's at this point where there are a lot of different opinions on the music of The Lord of the Rings. This is never more true with The Hobbit and The Return of the King, in which we have minstrels who were reciting tales, and we also have other little song montages which help to speed up the progression of the story. One song in particular, which has always been close to my heart, but seems to give a little bit of cringiness to some people, has always been Where There's a Whip, There's a Way.
There's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Left, right, left, right, left. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Left, right. A crack on the back says we're gonna fight. We're gonna march all day and night and more. For we are the slaves of the dark horse. Left, right.
Say what you will about that song, but I personally love it. It's those little campiness and wonderful little asides, which really don't offer, it gives you this wonderful little tune, which, yeah, it's cheesy, it's one of those things, but it's just so magical in the way Rankin and Bass were able to pull it off. I mean, you listen to the lyrics, and it's ridiculous. It's a bunch of orcs who are proudly marching off to their doom and being whipped at the same time and saying, heck, this is our life, this is what we're gonna do, so might as well get on with it. I mean, they're obviously not happy about it. They're obviously drudging along, waiting for the next battle. But at the end of the day, where there's a whip, there's a way. As with the Peter Jackson version, both Sam and Frodo are caught up in this line of marching towards the front gate, where it's the complete opposite of where they want to go. And just like in the movie, Sam is able to figure out a way to get them out of the situation.
Kill 'em, bone 'em, cut 'em to bits, smash 'em, crush 'em, skin 'em alive. Skin 'em alive.
The rest of the film is as intense and as dramatic as you would feel from reading The Lord of the Rings and The Return of the King in book format. This is the very first time we will see something on a visual format on television. And in my opinion, it really does bring out a lot of the great suspense and drama that you would expect from such a wonderful tale. There aren't too many differences between the Peter Jackson version and this version. Cinematically, obviously, animation is very different from film, but the tension and the way that the animators were able to capture the action adventure and the wonderful intrigue between characters is summed up very well in this version by Rankin and Bass. No more is this very apparent than the fight between Eowyn and the Witch King. This is almost as if it was retribution or a return to form when we actually compare it to the Balrog scene in the in The Lord of the Rings by Ralph Bakshi. As much as I love Ralph Bakshi and I love his work, unfortunately I really do have to say that Balrog scene was incredibly disappointing. Whereas in this version, the fight between Eowyn and the Witch King is just so incredible. She faces him down like the true warrior princess she is.
Do what you will. I will hinder it if I may.
Hinder me? Thou fool! No living man may hinder me!
But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Eowyn am I. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Begone. For living or dark undead, I will smite you if you touch him.
Along with being produced by one of arguably the greatest animation studios of all time, The Return of the King had a wonderful cast who obviously brought their voice talent to the scene, including Glenn Yarborough as the Minstrel of Gondor, Orson Bean as Frodo Baggins, John Huston returns as Gandalf the White, Brother Theodore as Gollum, Roddy McDowall as Samwise Gamgee, the late Casey Kasem as Meriadoc Brandybuck, or Mary, William Conrad as Denethor, Nellie Bellflower as Eowyn, Sonny Melendrez as Peregrine Took, or Pippin, Don Masek as Theoden, and John Stevenson as the Witch King of Agmar, and Theodore Beagle as Aragorn. I don't want to ruin too much more of the story, as I'm sure The Return of the King is something which almost everyone is aware of at this time, thanks to the Peter Jackson version. But I do encourage each and every one of you to search out for The Return of the King by Rankin and Bass, as I truly feel that this is not so much a superior version, but a wonderful addition to the tales and versions of the cinematics which have been released for all the tales of J.R.R. Tolkien's classics. This one in particular is very, very close to my heart, as I am a big fan of Rankin and Bass and their work. So for me, this is just another wonderful memory in my childhood. Oh, of course, it does showcase a lot of different scenes which were not in the Peter Jackson version, which for time constraints or anything else were cut from the film. And you really should see some of these wonderful sequences. I don't want to reveal too many more of them, as I think you should experience them for yourself. If you can find this, I'm pretty sure it's available somewhere, and almost certain that it's available on Amazon or eBay. Well guys, that'll about do it for my look back at The Return of the King. Once again, this is one of my favorite cartoons and memories of the 1980s. I still bring this down from the shelf and watch it from time to time, as I really do love the animation quality, and again, I'm just a huge fan of Rankin and Bass. Well guys, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a like. It really helps me out. If you have any comments or suggestions on anime, cartoons, toys, collectibles, or anything else you'd like me to review, please leave that in the comment section below. And consider subscribing. It helps YouTube to realize that I'm doing a good job and that you guys enjoy my work. Well guys, as always, thank you very much for watching. Geek proud. Check out some of the other episodes I've done. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter.